what else do we have to have? So you have the person, Sean Urbanski, admitting to the murder. They have the evidence. They have direct links with him being part of white supremacist groups. I mean, I think part of what it speaks to is that unfortunately white supremacy and racism are normalized in our society. So that bar we talk about, we can be very deliberate about what we mean by that bar. And I think part of highlighting it is the fact that Lieutenant Richard Collins, second Lieutenant Richard Collins, hasn't really even been acknowledged formally by the military.
New developments in the case of Lieutenant Richard W. Collins, Jr., who was fatally stabbed to death while waiting for a bus on the University of Maryland campus 2 years ago. According to police, a white man approached Collins and said, quote, step left if you know what's best for you. When he didn't move, Sean Urbanski stabbed him to death. Turns out Urbanski was involved with a racist Facebook group. Urbanski was charged with first-degree murder, and the FBI was asked to investigate the killing as a hate crime. The FBI has reportedly found no basis for a federal hate crime prosecution. Joining us now is Dr. Rashawn Ray from the University of Maryland, a board member board member there, and the second Lieutenant Richard Collins, board member of the second Lieutenant Richard W. Collins III Foundation. This sort of goes back to what Eric Holder said when he's Attorney General, that the bar is so high to reach federal civil rights violations, or in the case of hate crime. What more do you need than a white supremacist who targets a black man, a veteran, kills him, guy belonged to a racist hate group? What more do they need?
I mean, I'm unsure what else is needed in this particular case, but what it speaks to is broader trends as you lay out, as Eric Holder has done, as it relates to broader trends about who's killed in America and who's valued. So when we think about executions in the United States, what we actually see is that 76% of individuals who are executed allegedly murdered a white person. What's interesting is that only 50% of the murder victims are white. So we have a huge disparity there. The other part of this relates to black victims. Only about 20 times in the United States has a black victim had a white murderer, and then that white murderer actually been given the death penalty. When it comes to hate crimes, I think part of what happens in the United States is, as you mentioned, the bar is so high. And part of the reason why the bar is so high is because racism is a pillar that holds up the United States. And as that particular pillar, things that oftentimes should be deemed as racist or racism is actually deemed as normative behavior. So when we see in the example of Sean Urbanski, and I mean, Lieutenant Richard Collins, I mean, God rest his soul, he was getting ready to graduate from Bowie State University. He was waiting for a vehicle to come pick him up with some of his friends. He was doing everything that he had been taught by his parents, who are wonderful people, who had raised him and his sister in a household that I think is oftentimes a beacon of hope for a lot of people. They did everything right. He was getting ready to go serve his country, and yet and still, before he could actually go overseas to help protect the United States, he was taken out by white supremacists at the University of Maryland in a space that was supposed to be safe for him.
What is the status of the Urbanski case?
The status of the case currently is that it is ongoing. It hasn't went to trial yet, but there was a recent development in the sense that they're not going to seek the death penalty in the case. I think what becomes clear to people in the state of Maryland, in Prince George's County in particular, in Bowie and College Park, as well as around the country.
He tells him, step to the left, if you don't know something's going to happen, and he kills him. Not seek the death penalty?
So what's interesting about this particular case, when they dug into Urbanski's history, what they found was that he was part of online white supremacist groups. So not only was it about telling him to step to the left, that it was a deliberate act, but it's also the fact that he had white supremacist ties. And so the fact that a hate crime would not be something that would be pursued, to me, is unfathomable, given what we know about this particular case and given what we know about hate crimes more broadly in the United States.
Does it make any sense?
No, it doesn't. You know, you know, he and I are colleagues, Dr. Ray and I, and everybody was shaken and hurt by this murder. It was, you know, he was a Bowie State student, but still a part of the university system of Maryland. And it really hurt all of us. It hurt I even spoke to police officers, and they were traumatized by what had occurred. This whole case, the fact that they are not seeking the death penalty, you know, I have my own feelings about the death penalty, but what I will say is the fact that they're not viewing this as a hate crime when the police have recommended that it be viewed as a hate crime, it's really disappointing about our system. But again, these are the way things seem to happen in our society and in our system, and how we value, even like as Rashawn said, the people who do things every way right. You know, so first we see a lot of young black people. People say their lives don't matter because of some choices they may have made when they were younger, and so you blame them. You say that they're thugs, but you have someone who actually did everything the way that the system says it's supposed to be done. Someone who is serving his country, and you take him out and you don't value him enough to give him full justice. I think it's despicable. And we hope that he gets, Sean Urbanski faces the full brunt of the law.
Darlene, this is one of those cases, again, that is quite perplexing to black folks. White supremacist kills black men, not only not facing federal hate crime charges, but not even seeking the death penalty. And when people talk about two different justice systems, this rings loud and clear.
It does. One question I would have, though, is I'm not too familiar with the case, but did Maryland say why they're not pursuing the death penalty or hate crimes?
You know, part of what's
been
been
reason or justification.
You know, part of what's been interesting about this case is the lack of information to the public, even the lack of information to people who are close. And I find that extremely troubling in a county that is majority African American, that is the most affluent African American county in the United States. And yet and still, this is something where people have to pry and ask, what is the status of this particular case? That happened at the flagship university where Dr. Nichols and I happen to work. People shouldn't have to wonder what's happening. Things should be very transparent. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And I think that
should have been nationwide news as well. You know, the fact that it was so localized, at least it seemed like to me, I was expecting perhaps even the president to weigh in, but, you know, we know who we have as president. But, you know, I would think that this would be nationwide news. The fact that someone who is a college student about to be a college graduate, someone who is serving his country, gets murdered in cold blood on a college campus, you would think that this would be huge. This would be something that people are discussing. And, but only on the Roland Martin show and a few other places.
No, it's no shock to me.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning about the high bar to actually prove a hate crime. And it seems like that's where we are. You know, this is a different situation, even if you believe that Jussie Smollett, that there were people, you know, you had epithets involved in that. So there was something that people could connect to it, even though with the history of this guy, you know, his white supremacist history or whatever, whether or not that factored into the commission of the crime. And I don't know if they proved that. And so that may be why we're not seeing at least the hate crime portion of that, because it's such a high bar. I would imagine that's
I mean, what's interesting to me, like I always kind of think, what else do we have to have? So you have the person, Sean Urbanski, admitting to the murder. They have the evidence. They have direct links with him being part of white supremacist groups. I mean, I think part of what it speaks to is that unfortunately, white supremacy and racism are normalized in our society. So that bar we talk about, we can be very deliberate about what we mean by that bar. And I think part of highlighting it is the fact that Lieutenant Richard Collins, Second Lieutenant Richard Collins, hasn't really even been acknowledged formally by the military, whether that be at universities outside of Bowie State or even nationally, in regards to giving him his proper credit. And I think that's something that really needs to happen.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, he was a veteran. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Rashawn Ray, we certainly appreciate it. We're certainly glad to be able to highlight this story and elevate it. And we'll keep watching it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right.